This is Thank You Mama, weekly lessons from mothers all around the world. Hello and welcome to Thank You Mama. My name is Anna Teider and I have a very special treat for you today. Today my guest is Norway's most famous feminist, Marta Breen. Marta is a non-fiction writer and journalist. She's the author of How to Be a Feminist, with the subtitles of 20 Ways to Equality in Life, Work and Love, and of a graphic novel called Women in Battle, which is about 150 years of fight for equality. And as I've just learned, Marta has a new book coming out, which I'm super excited about. It's called The City of Women, and it's a feminist guide through Oslo. And I was just begging Marta to do to do similar guides through other cities around Europe and the world. Marta, welcome.
Thank you very much.
I am so excited that you're here. And just as we were speaking right now, I've realized, to my very big shame, that you are my, I think, 90-second interview. And I have guests from, I think, 50 countries around the world. You are my first guest from Scandinavia. Wow. Which is crazy.
Yeah.
And especially because Scandinavia is so famous for its feminism and position of women. And I'm very, very, very excited to talk to you about it today.
Thank you so much. Very nice to be here.
Yeah. Will you tell me about yourself and your work and your books?
Well, I've written the books that you mentioned. One of those are, as you said, a graphic novel. I don't draw myself, fortunately. I cannot draw, but I have collaborated with an illustrator called Jenny Urdal for a few years now. And earlier last year, we released a book called The Fall of the Patriarchy, which is a follow-up to the book Women in Battle. Women in Battle is out in 27 countries at the moment. So when that happened, because I have written 10 books in Norwegian before that one, and then when this suddenly became such an international export article, I started to travel. I traveled a lot. Of course, not as much in the pandemic, but in the years before. And now I've started to travel again. I've been, like you say, a well-known feminist in Norway for a few years, and I've been all over Norway and in almost every school in the whole country. But now I like to travel abroad because, as you also said, that the Scandinavian countries, we are known for having a very equal society, and we do very well. Women do very well in almost all sectors. So I do believe that maybe my voice is needed more outside of the Nordic countries. So next week I'm going to go to Egypt. Because Women in Battle, it released in Arabic, and I was also invited to Saudi Arabia, but I have to wait until the autumn. And I've talked about feminism in Brazil, Russia, Germany, Poland, Hungary, in many of these countries where things actually go in the wrong direction at the moment. So that's my focus right now.
Marta, I'm very curious, how did it happen? How did you become an author and a feminist? What led you there?
I do actually have a book with the title Born Feminist. So maybe I was born this way. But my mother, she was part of the women's liberation movement in the 1970s. So as long as I can remember, this has been an issue at home. When my mother grew up, most women were housewives, and then her generation came along and they fought for kindergartens, for parental permit leaves, and abortion, for safe abortions. So I was, I think, 3 or 4 years old when I took part in these marches in the streets. So it's always just been there. And then in the 80s and 90s, when I was growing up, feminism was not that popular in Norway either, because it had been a big thing in the 70s, and the women's liberation movement was all over, and everybody was talking about it. And then everything has like a backlash. When something is very popular, then it becomes more unpopular. And that was what I grew up in. And I remember people asking for forgiveness if they said anything political or anything feminism. It was like, I'm no feminist, but I do.
Yeah. I remember those times.
Yeah. I was a bit confused in those days, because I was actually very proud of my mother and her friends, and I just kept a low profile for a while. But then, and when I was 20 years old, I joined the feminist group in Oslo, and I started. I wrote in this anthology in 1999. Which is, many people say that this book was kind of the start of a new wave in Norway in the late 90s. And then since then, I've been kind of a public feminist. So there's no way back.
Marta, can I ask you, I'm going to put this question very purposely in a very maybe simple or popularistic terms.
Yeah.
And it's it comes from my feeling. I have a feeling partially the backlash came because people saw the feminists of the 70s as very unfeminine, and not, I'm putting this purposely, as non-sexy. And then in the 90s, we kind of reinvented feminism by allowing it a more feminine side. Would you agree with me with it?
It is true that very many people started to slam the 70s feminists and talked about them as angry, ugly, bitter. But then I think there's two lines here, because first of all, when we look at now, if you go back and look at pictures of these young women in the 70s, they were actually very beautiful.
Yes.
Most of them, like young women are. So the rebellion they made against the beauty regime that women were supposed to be part of, it was really needed. We really needed that. We needed someone to do that.
Because they came, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but because they were the generation who grew up with petticoats and wired bras and garters and all this very, very strict, still Victorian way towards the way a woman should look. So,
And they also grew up with, they were socialized into believing that to get married is the most important thing you can do. And to get married, you have to look like a woman and everything. So it is, I believe it's very unfair to accept that image of them as because you don't shave your body hair. That's beautiful. I believe they look beautiful. They were natural. They were hippie-like. Some of them. So that's one thing I would protest against, that common view of them not being feminine and beautiful. And also in the 80s and 90s, yes, women, young women, they wanted to. They talked. Many talked about taking their sexuality back. It should be allowed to be feminine and everything. And it had not. It's never been prohibited to be feminine because these women in the 70s, they were not all women. They were just a small part of women. They were rebellious women. Most women in the 70s, they kept on doing the same thing. And also in the 80s and 90s, most women have kept this femininity going. Yeah. So in the 70s, it became very political and correct to use like a naked woman to sell a car, a half-naked woman in commercials, to use that male gaze everywhere. And then in the 90s, we just let all that come back. And now today we have all over this, everywhere. There's half-naked, sexy women trying to be sexy for the male gaze, and there's also commercials for plastic surgery at public transport. So I don't think that it was very successful. Our generations wanting to take our sexuality back.
No. It boomeranged in a very weird direction. Very counterproductive.
Yeah.
Before we start talking about your mama, let's talk about, you must be already very bored of this question, about feminism in Scandinavia, and why is Scandinavia so good at it, or why are women in Scandinavia so good at it?
My point is not to say that Scandinavian women are better feminists than anybody else, but we have been lucky enough to have the authorities on our side in a number of important issues for a long time, and therefore we probably live freer lives than many others, because the feminism is kind of institutionalized in the society. And this is what I'm going to talk about in Egypt next week, that according to all scientists who write about this, there's a very close link between a country's economic and social equality and its level of welfare. And the Nordic countries is a very good example of that. Countries with small income gaps and high levels of equality, they score better consistently on all matters like health and well-being and economy and happiness. So that's so equality is a success factor. Why was that the question? Why we do have this in Norway? Yeah, well, everything is, as I was saying, linked. Some people, when it comes to Norway, some people say that, you have this great parental permit leaves and all the kindergartens and everything because of the oil, because we are rich. We're a rich country because of oil. But it's not only the oil; it's mainly because we do have such a high percentage of women in the workforce. I believe it's the highest percentage of women in the workforce in the whole world. And that means that so many more people are paying taxes and contributing to the economy. So this politics has been very active for around 40 years, and that also influences Norwegian women to believe in this politics, to talk about it, to dare to call themselves feminists, and to be relaxed around these issues. I do sometimes travel to countries who not only are most women afraid of this F word, as I call it. When it comes to the 8th of March, International Women's Day, in very many countries, they celebrate it like it was something between Mother's Day and Valentine's Day. Guys thinks that this is a
romantic day.
Yeah, it's a romantic day. You can give your woman some flowers.
Yeah.
Or some sweet little greeting card. But I said this in the Norwegian newspaper on the Women's Day, that if some guy gave me heart-shaped chocolates on Women's Day, I would be provoked and angry, because this is a fighting day. It's a political day. In Norway, we march in the streets to celebrate the victories we won, to shed lights on new issues. It's not a Valentine's Day. So, yeah, it's big differences across the borders.
Wow, so much to talk about. We could spend our whole time just talking about this, but let's jump to Mama. We've already learned a little bit about her. Mama Elisabeth.
Yeah.
Tell me about her. Where is she from?
She's from Oslo, and she lives 100 meters from me.
Oh, that's nice. Does she really?
Yeah, I'm a mama's girl, so it was me who, when we were looking for a new house, we bought it very close by, and it is of course because we need babysitters as well. So I have a sister, half sister, which I grew up together with, and my mother raised both of us. So both of our fathers was not that much in the picture, and she raised us alone. And I learned a lot from her. She was never. She hasn't. I don't believe she tried to learn us to be like an educator, or she didn't have these talks about politics or the world and feminism. She was just doing her thing, and I listened. Sometimes secretly. I was always joining her and her friends on their meetings. She was active in many different politics groups when I grew up. Mm-hmm. My older sister, she was not interested. She was just out of the house and doing her thing. And I was more, like a mama girl.
Mama girl. And does she have a profession? Did she work?
Yeah, she did work, like, I don't know the English expression. She was a repro technician, like the person who make the newspapers side, like graphics.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Graphic designer, would we say today, but it was a bit different back in the days. But she was also, there was a big movement in the 70s in Norway, which was a kind of a communist movement. Both my parents was part of that. There was a period that people who had education, I don't know if you had this in Austria, but people who was already educated, they started to do manual labor instead. Because that was part of the communist policy, if you understand what I mean. So they were kind of in opposition to academics because they wanted to be part of the labor movement and the labor class.
I read about your father, actually, who was a journalist, and he started to be a journalist. And then there's the whole story about how he worked in a metal factory. Do I have that right? Now it's explained to me, because I was wondering what happened.
He was actually building the oil platforms in the 70s because Norway is known for the oil. And then this came very suddenly in Norway. Suddenly we had to get all this oil up from the sea, and then very many people worked in this industry, and he was making these oil platforms. And that was kind of because his father was an author, and my father is very smart, and he was kind of, it would have been more natural actually for him to go to the university. But then it was in their policy to do manual work instead.
So is that what she did as well?
She did not educate herself. I believe that her career was also very affected by this kind of thinking. She could have become something else and with more education and more focus on jobs and career. But that was not part of my parents'
philosophy of life or plan.
Philosophy of life, yes.
Oh, that's so fascinating.
I've talked so much about with them later on, because it kind of affected me as well, because I actually don't have any education myself. That is much more rare in my age group. There's almost no Norwegians that I know in my generation that doesn't have education. So I started to ask myself a few years back, why did my life become the way it was? And then why didn't I go to university? And then I realized that it's probably because my parents and my mother especially never talked about this as an option. She was very into me being self-sufficient. Because she had been left as a single mother, and she didn't want me to depend on a man. She wanted me to support myself from the very beginning. And she said, if you start to study, you'll get into debts. And then maybe you don't even have a real occupation when you're done. So it's much better to start working and working your way up. And then, well, that's what I did.
So what is she doing? Is she retired now? Is she still active?
Yes. No, she's retired now, and she is married again with also an old communist. And then, they, as I said, they live nearby, so I see them quite often. They love travel, only to Greece. They go
Only to Greece.
Yeah, they spend around 4 months every year in Greece, and they've done that for 20, 30 years. And they have lots of friends down there, and they like to drink wine and listen to music.
Nice. It sounds like a good choice.
Yeah.
Let's talk about what do you feel were the most important things you've learned from her. I know we kind of addressed many things already, but let's just put them in lessons.
Yeah. For me, I believe that the most important thing I've learned from my mother is that being political and trying to make a change, it works. And it's very important. And it's what we should be doing. So she hasn't said that to me, but I've just seen it, because when I grew up, she worked full days, and when she got home, she cooked us dinner, and then she was going to meetings, or there was meetings at our house. Today, people in my generation go out to exercise in their spare time when they're finished with working and everything else. We are exercising, not me, but many. But they didn't do that in the 70s. They had no time for exercise. They had so many things that they should achieve. Like when I was born, there was almost no kindergartens in Norway. Now every kid in Norway has a place in a kindergarten if they want.
Also nurseries. What is the nursery situation?
When you're 1 year old, you are granted a nursery.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah. And then when I was born, it was 3 months paid parental leave for the mothers. That meant that most women had to quit their jobs, because you can't put your kid in someone else's care when they're 3 months old. The women's liberation movement in Norway fought for this, and now we have 1 year paid parental leave. Also, when I was born, there was no abortion rights, luckily for me. But now we do have a good system around this. So all of these freedoms that we take for granted today, it wasn't here just 40 years ago. And because of my mother and all of her women in her generation, we do have this. So that's kind of something I've just seen. It's given me this grit to go try do it myself with today's issues.
Anything else? Any other things you feel like you've learned from her?
Well,
or if not, then I'm gonna ask you the trick question.
Yeah. Yeah.
The one we already talked about, which is if there was anything she was not able to teach you, anything you find important that what you would wish she was able to teach you.
Yeah, it's a very difficult question, because I usually don't talk negative about my mother. Well, nobody probably likes to do that. But, well, I do believe that she might have struggled with showing generosity towards others. She's always been very focused on her own family. And me and my sister, of course. But because she had to fight harder than we have to in so many ways, and she's experienced losses, and also was met with less understanding from the surroundings than I feel that I am today. That kind of made her a bit harder, if you understand. So while I can afford to be more generous, and I can afford to use humor and laugh about it, she was kind of a bit
stricter.
Stricter, yeah.
But here generosity, the first thing that comes to mind when one hears generosity is financial generosity. But you are talking more about understanding, allowing other people to not be at their best. Can I say that way?
Yeah. I was not talking about economics, but about how to respond to other people. You know, we were talking about earlier about how the women of the 70s, they got this label as they were angry and bitter and man haters. that is, of course, a very big generalization about a large group of women, and it's not true. But also when it comes to man not hate, but skepticism. If you have a lot of bad experiences and you are used to that, what you're talking about when it comes to equality and feminism is not well received by men at all, then of course you get a bit more skeptical. And you maybe don't, when you meet a new man, you might not give him that clean sheet if you so that is thing that I believe that because I've had in my generations, there are many male feminists, very many. I know so many men that support women's fight in every way, and she didn't have that experience.
I like when you started using the word skepticism towards others. I think it's maybe better describes that than the lack of generosity. I think, and I love it how you connected it to her very hard experiences in life, where life marks you and wounds you in so many different ways that it's very difficult for you to face others with trust and open heart immediately. We put a hard shell around us when we've experienced hard things in life. Am I going in the right direction?
Yeah, that's a good. You sum it up.
Yeah. Oh, that's fascinating. Is there anything else you'd like to mention?
No, I believe that I have never talked this much about my mother in public, and I wouldn't do it in Norway because she's a very private person. But I know that she doesn't listen to this podcast, so it's fine. But it's emotional because the relationship you have with your mother is, if she's alive, it's developing all the time, and we have had all these talks for 45 years almost, and you understand more and more of each other, and I can see her strengths and I can see her weaknesses, and probably the other way around.
It's an always evolving relationship. And I have to tell you, after I lost my mom, I was very, very close with my mom. And I'm very surprised after I lost her that this getting to know her and the relationship continues evolving. That's interesting. And part of that was starting this podcast, and I've learned so much through this podcast about my mom and through talking to other women about their moms, and that's beautiful. How it's beautiful. You work on it actively. You talk to her and allow some women close themselves towards their moms and just don't want to do that work. It's beautiful. You see it that way. You're open to it evolving.
Yeah. Thank you. Because I'm actually planning on writing a book about my upbringing in the Communist Party, and my mother, she doesn't like it, but she's accepted it because she knows that I have to write this book. And my father, he doesn't like it either, but he has also kind of accepted it. So I've interviewed them both about their life together. They were actually just together for 2 years, and it was a very dramatic story. Their love story was very dramatic, and my mother has kind of disliked my father for my whole life, and I have always known, and she hasn't put anything in between. I always know that she's got this anger against him. And I believe when I was 15 years old, I was so tired of that because I had to go to him a few times a year. And that was nice. I had a good relationship with my father, but she also always made it very clear that she didn't like to have anything to do with him. And then I was so I said, and I was 15 years old, and I said, now, Mama, you don't have to talk to him ever again. I am taking over your relationship with him. Everything can go just through me, and you don't have to talk to him, because I couldn't stand it. That was it until I got married 15 years later. Then they met again in the wedding. And then it was better. It was better. So, and it was first when I started interviewing them a couple of years ago that I truly understood why she was so angry, because they hadn't told me the whole story. And then I became a bit angry myself, but then, but it's a very ancient history now. So I hope that I can write the whole thing down, both the personal story, but also the politician, the politics in it, because as I said, they were very active. So that is my next book, and I believe it's going to take a couple of years before it's out. But and I hope that both my mother and father wants to talk to me after it's out.
I would like to send you my book that I wrote about my childhood in Yugoslavia. It's called Titoland.
Oh, wow.
And it sounds very similar, because I was writing about what Yugoslavia was, which many people don't know, what a mix of communism and capitalism it was, and how it was positioned between West and East. Yeah. But I also wrote a lot about I wrote about that political situation and about how the war happened in Yugoslavia, but through the eyes of the child I was. And it was quite difficult for me as well. And I've written some things inside about my parents that were hard for me. I was very nervous about how they will receive it. But I have to tell you, for me, it was a very healing process. I was very proud how they both accepted what they read, and in a way it mended wounds, it helped all of us. So I hope that for you
that was comforting. So I really hope, so interesting. I would like, is it in English? Translated?
I translated it in English. It was never published, but if you would like to read it, I'll send you the PDF, the English feed. It's a short book.
I would love to read it.
Oh, Marta, this was really fantastic. Thank you again so much for being my guest.
Very nice. It was very nice. And I feel like I've been in a therapy session.
So many guests tell me this. Yeah. I hope it feels good. It feels positive, like a good therapy session.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, that's wonderful. But let's recap. So through our therapy session today, we learned about, from Mama Elisabeth, about being self-sufficient and how important that is, especially through her experiences, which were quite rough through men and her life, and being a single mother of two daughters. But also that being political and trying to make a change works. And what I would kind of like to mention as a lesson, you didn't mention it as a lesson, but it kind of showed itself to me through our conversation, is how mothers model lessons, how we don't necessarily need to teach our children as give them lessons, but it's so important what we model to them. I love how you kept saying that you just saw your mother doing these things, and you just learned through watching her.
Yeah, that's how I try to be a parent myself.
Yes, me too. And something you wish she was able to teach you, let me put it as not being too skeptical towards others. We talked about how her tough experiences kind of created that hard shell around her, and how, as I'm hearing out from you what you said, you had to learn for yourself to be more, now I want to use the word generous towards others and open towards others. I think these were beautiful. Marta, thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Anna.
If you enjoy Thank You, Mama, and want to help it grow, please take the 2 seconds to leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. It really helps. If you'd like to get in touch, you can send me a mail at info@thankyouMama.net. You can also find me on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter under Anna Teider, that's Tajder. This was Thank You Mama. Come back next week, subscribe, and tell your friends.